How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem Aleph, Daf 41 of Masechta Sanhedrin. Friends, your friends. Yeah, today's the Gavaldic Daf. The first part of the Daf requires a little bit of thinking. Oh no, is the sun out again? Hopefully not. The first chunk of the daf requires a little bit of thinking, and then it's a good daf. There's some interesting stuff here. All right, we're going to start on the first wide line. Daf Mem Aleph Mud Aleph, the first wide line of the daf. Hiter Atzman Lemisa Azoy. So I think, was it already in? I think there's a train running above me. I could feel it. Hiter Atzman Lemisa. I think it was definitely at the bottom of the. It was at the bottom of Mem Amud Beis in a brisa, but basically you have to warn a guy that if he, let's say he's Michal Shabbos, you got to warn him. If you do this, you're going to be Chayiv Skila. And then what does Rashi say? Aman Mem Amud Beis, actually 4 lines from the bottom of Rashi Ksheis. But when you warned him, Al Tavish Atam Chayiv Misa Plonis, right? Don't be Michal Shabbos because be Chayiv Skila. Homer Amanaskin Aniose Tim Loivkir Azel. He says, yeah, I know. I'm doing this with the knowledge that I'm chayiv skila. I'm doing it anyways. So was he hitir atzman lemisa? Did he sort of accept his fate that he's going to be killed for doing his actions? How do we know that this is a requirement that he has to say amanas kin aniyose, that he's mafkir atzman lemisa? What? My nose is bothering. 1 second. Sorry, Mom. Okay. Hopefully that should do it. All right. How do we know this? Amar Rav says, the pasuk says, Yumas Hames, that who's going to be killed? The mace, the dead one is going to be killed. What does it mean the dead one's going to be killed? Well, he basically already was mafkir himself to Misa by saying, yeah, I know I'm going to be chayiv skila. I'm doing it anyways. At that point, he's basically a dead man. Amar Rav Chanan says, Rav Chanan, Eidei Naira Marasa Cheved. For this next chunk, for the next about 10-15 lines or so, we're going to have to use our brains a little bit. Amar Rav Chanan says, Rav Chanan, Eidei Naira Marasa Shehuzmu Eino Ne'erogin. So, what's a Naira Marasa? Naira Marasa is a betrothed maiden, a betrothed Naira, and she has an affair, assuming that it is consensual. So, both the Naira and the boil, receive skila. So now, if witnesses come and say, we saw that this Naira Marasa was Mizana, so then she's going to get skila. If they're Eidim Zomimin, then she doesn't get skila, they do. However, Amar Rav Chanan says, Eidei Naira Marasa Shuzmu Ein Nerogin, that they don't get skila. They aren't killed when they become Zoomers. Because they can make the following argument: we didn't come to kill her. We just wanted to make her usher to her husband. We didn't actually want to kill her and give her skila. We just wanted to make her usher. That's all. But what do you mean we just wanted to make her usher? Didn't they warn her? Didn't they say, hey, Naira Marasa, if you have bia with this fellow, you're going to be chayiv skila. So obviously they knew what they were doing. Delo asuba. No, they didn't warn her. Well, fekti gemara asuba. Well, if they didn't warn her, well then obviously they're not chayiv misa when they become zoomers, because she's not chayiv as misa without hasra, without a warning. Heichi miktula, right? Ilo asuba heichi miktula. Who's miktula? Is that her? I mean, whether it's her, whether it's them, I guess it's miktula. If they didn't warn her, then how is she going to be killed? She's not going to be chayiv eskila if they didn't warn her, and then obviously if they didn't warn her and she's not chayiv es misa, well, of course then they're not chayiv misa. That should be obvious. Well, bisha chavera. So the Gemara says, well, actually, what's interesting here is we're talking about an isha chavera. We're talking about a woman who knows. She's a talmidas chachomim, and she knows the halachas. And based on and in line with the view, the opinion of Yosef of Yehuda, the Tanya, the learned by Yosef of Yehuda Omer, Chaver ain't tzarich asra. That somebody who knows the halachis, you don't need to warn them because they know already what they're doing. The point of asra is just as to ascertain that this person is doing this avera on purpose. So you warn them, don't do it. If you do it, you can be chayiv this misa, and then they do it anyways. So now you know for sure that they knew what they were doing. But if you already know that this person is a Talmid Chacham, or in this case a Talmidas Chachamim, so they don't need asra, because they already know that what to do. Right? This Nara Marosa already knows that she's Mechayev Eskila. So therefore, she didn't require asra. So there was no asra, because she's a Nisha Chavera. She didn't require asra. And then, so they witnessed her having this affair, and she knew obviously what she was doing was wrong and that she be chayev skila. She did it anyways. They're now testifying against her. She's going to be chayev skila, but they can make if they become edim zomim, they can make the argument that they just wanted to make her asura to her fiance. But fact the Gemara, that's incorrect. Remember, Chevra, a key factor to testimony is edus she'ata yochol la'azimo. It's testimony that you must be able to be mekayim v'asisim lo kasher zomim la'asos lo'achim. Edim zomimim. Testimony has to be zomim. So therefore, and what's zomim? That v'asisim lo kasher zomim la'asos lo'achim. That you do to them what they tried to do to the other person. And therefore, it's impossible to have a scenario where witnesses are going to testify against this Nara Marosa and be mechayiv her skila, and yet, when they become edim zomim, they don't get skila. Impossible, because that means that we're not mekayim hazama. Hazama is you do to them what they tried to do to her. If what you're going to do to them in the case of hazama is not what they tried to do to her, that is not edim zomim. And if it's not edim zomim, well then it's not valid testimony, because you need to have edus shata yochol azimu. So therefore, if they're not going to be killed because they're going to make the argument loso abayla, so then how can we kill her? What we do to them has to be reflective of what they were doing to her. If they're going to kill her, but we are not going to kill them, well then their testimony against her is edus she'iyata yochel azima, v'chol edus she'iyata yochel azima lo shma edus, and it's not valid testimony if it's iyata yochel azima. So chinami ka'amar. So the Gemara says eno chinami. You know what? Mitoch she'ein neheragin. So rather, because the witnesses would not be killed as edim zomim shechon lo melosa abayla banu, since they can argue that they only intended to make her asura to her husband. After all, there was no warning because she's neisha chavera. So since they can make the argument that la'osa abayla shanu banu, and therefore they are not chayav misa, so therefore afhi ein nereges tavila edus shat yochel azima. So also we are not going to kill her, because that would be edus shat yochel azima, since we are not going to kill the potential edim zomim. But if that's the case, then how can you have a scenario of an Isha Chavera who would be killed according to Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Yehuda? Oh, well, what if she was mizaneh twice? Right, so when you have this Isha Chavera, and witnesses come and say that she was mizaneh, and we're not going to kill her, because it's Edu Shiatu Yochol Azima, because they can argue Lo'oso Abayla Shanu. But what happens when she does it Nochamo? So the first time we didn't kill her, and they say Lo'oso Abayla, but now Nochamo they come, Now Nochamal they come. So meaning, so right. So and then Nochamal they come and say that she was mizaneh, So that this time they can't say also Abai Lashana because she was already asura to him from the first time. So now they should be able to be Edim Zomim, and they would be Chayiv Misa. But Vayichol Nomer also Abo'ala Sheni Banu. But this time they could say, wait, but why are you killing us? We only wanted her to make her asur to the second person who she slept with, who she had an affair with. Because when she has an affair, she's not just asura to her husband, but also to the person who she had an affair with. Well, she was mizaneh with the same person as the first time, so therefore they can't say that we want to make her asur to the boel. She's already asur to the boel from the first time, and she's also already asur lebaila. So therefore there would be chayiv misa. Alternatively, if the second time she was mizaneh from her relative, so they can't say, well, we want to make her asur to the relative. She's already asur to the relative. Okay, fine. In fact, the Gemara Maishna Nair Me'orasa Dinokat Afilu Nesua Nami. In fact, how come we need specifically this case by Nair Me'orasa? Technically, this same could be true by just any Eishes Ish who's mizaneh. So that's correct. Ela Afilu Haid, but the point is that even by Nair Me'orasa, Lo Yazva to say, they were never married yet. They were engaged, but they were never married. And therefore, nobody, it's not like people, recognize them necessarily as a couple per se. But nonetheless, Yichon Lomar, the witnesses can still say, the Mzom can still say, Losa Abai Labanu, we came to make her asura to her husband, even though it's not like an established relationship, they are not living together yet, but still, they can make the argue Losa Abai Lashanu, and therefore they would not be Chayiv Misa. Okay. That was kind of the more intense part. Omer Rav Chizda says, Rav Chizda, Echad Omer b'Sayif Arago, Echad Omer b'Ariron Arago. Says Rav Chizda that if one witness says that Ruvain murdered Shimon with a sword, the other one says it was with an Ariron, some other kind of sharp object thing, Harago, Ein Ze Nachon. Well, that's a problem, but that's not valid testimony. Because if we're talking about a murder, the weapon that was used in the murder is like a that's like a key detail. Echad Omer Kelev Shchein, Echad Omer Kelev Levanim. But if one witness says he was wearing a white shirt, the other one says he was wearing a black shirt, that's kind of Facebook meta information. So then, Arei Zenachon, that's still valid testimony according to Rav Chizda. However, we have a kashan of Chizda Nachon, Shei Nachon. When the pasuk says Ve'ene Emes Nachon, it has to be valid. It has to be correct. And therefore, Echad Omer B'Sayfer, Echad Omer Ba'Rigon Araro. Bariron Arago, if one says it was with a sword, the other one says it was with a riron, or Echad Omer Kelev Shchein, Echad Omer Kelev Vanim. Alternatively, if one says he was wearing a white shirt, the other one says he's wearing a black shirt, or Fakir, that gets black and white, Ein Zeh Nachon, it is invalid testimony. So here we have a brisa that's saying the white shirt, black shirt thing is a problem. Rav Chizda, however, said that the white shirt, black shirt thing is okay. So, and for the Gemara, Tir Gemara Rav Chizda would answer, Besudur Shechon Kubo Danu Sai Varirun. Well, yeah, when we're talking about the clothing that he was wearing, it's talking about where he strangled the person to death with that clothing, and therefore that clothing becomes consequential evidence. And they got to get their facts straight on it. Tashma Kamanir, Echad Omer Sandal of Shcherin, Vechad Omer Sandal of Levanim. Yeah, we'll learn a brisa. One witness says he was wearing white shoes, the other one says he was wearing black shoes. That seems to be like Facebook metadata, and still we're saying Ein Zeh Nachon. It's a problem. Also, they're also talking where he kicked him to death. So therefore, again, there the shoe becomes a consequential detail. Toshma Kamanir, Maise uvorak ben Zakai beuktzei tena. There was a Toshma. Come in here again. Maise uvorak ben Zakai beuktzei tena. There was a Maise. There was a story. Uvorak ben Zakai beuktzei tena. That Ben Zakai asked a very, very detailed question regarding how thick the stems of a fig were. It's a very detailed question. Very Facebook meta-y. And yet we're saying that because of that was a basis for invalidating the testimony. It's the kashan of Chizda. Says well, that's talking about a scenario where what was the case? What was the offense? The offense was that he picked a fig on Shabbos, which is not allowed. And therefore, the thickness of the stem becomes a consequential detail. V'tanya, but we learn in the Brisa, Amrulo, they said to him, Tachas te'ena harago. It's talking about a murder case. That Reuven murdered Shimon under a fig tree. And now we're asking about the thickness of the stems of the figs. That's very sort of Facebook meta-y. And yet it seems that that's a basis for invalidating the testimony. Rather says Sheshipto Beyichur Shaltanis, says it's talking about where he stabbed him to death with the stem, I guess, with a branch of a fig tree, and we want to know the thickness of that branch or that stem. So again, it becomes consequential information. But Toshma, coming here, Amrulayin, he said to them, Te'enazo, this fig, was its stem thick or thin? Te'enim shchoris, te'enim levanos, were they black figs? Were they white figs? We're talking about the figs themselves. See, Reuven did not kill Shimon with a fig. That's for sure. And yet we're getting into the details here. And that seems to be basis for invalidating the witnesses. El Omer of Yosef, rather says of Yosef, Ben Zakkai Losiv Inish. No, don't ask kashas from Ben Zakkai, shiny Ben Zakkai, the bedikois, kachakiros majvele. Ben Zakkai considered bedikois to be just like chakiros, and therefore making a mistake on a bedika is just as important as making as significant as making a mistake on the chakiros. My Ben Zakkai, who is Ben Zakkai? Ilim Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. Well, maybe it's Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. Mihav b'Sanhedrin, but Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai during Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai's time, they were not judging capital cases. The only capital cases are judged by a Sanhedrin Ketana. We only add Sanhedrin Ketanas when there was the Sanhedrin Gedol and the Lishkas Agozis. That's when there were also Sanhedrin Ketanas that were judging capital cases. So long as there was no Sanhedrin Gedol and the Lishkas Agozis, there were no capital cases being adjudicated. So it can't be that Ben Zakkai is Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, because why would Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai have been interrogating witnesses? That implies that he was a judge in a capital case. Were there being capital cases judged when he would have been a judge? We learn in the Brisa, Kol Shnoso Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai Meh ve'esrim shana. Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai lived for 120 years. Ayboim shana also b'pragmati. His first 40 years, he was busy. He was in business. Mem shana, the next 40 years, lomad, he was learning. Ayboim shana limed, and for the last 40 years of his life, he was teaching. And the assumption being that at what point in his life would he have been a judge in a Sanhedrin Ketana? That would have been the last 40 years of his life when he's already a teacher. V'tanya, we're learning the Brisa, that 40 years prior to the destruction of the second temple, the Sanhedrin relocated from the Lishkas Agozis, and they went to a place called Chanus, which means Sanhedrin, for the last 40 years of the Beis HaMikdash, the Sanhedrin was not in the Lishkas Agozis, which means, Memela, that there were no capital cases being adjudicated. But Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avudimi, it says, Lomar to say, Shlodonu dine knosus, they didn't judge fines anymore. Dine knosus, what does the Lishkas Agozis have to do with fines? Shlodonu dine nefashos. That they were no longer judging capital cases in the last 40 years of the second temple. Vitnan, and we learn in the Mishnah, where's this Mishnah? Rosh Hashanah. Mishachar of Beis HaMikdash, that after the destruction of the temple, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai made a certain takana. So what do we see? So if we put all the pieces together, that Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai was alive after the second temple, because it says after the second temple, he made a takana. So Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai was alive after the second temple. We also know that he lived till 120. We also know that the last 40 years of his life was when he was teaching. That would have been when he would have been a judge in the Sanhedrin Ketana. But we also know that there was no Sanhedrin Ketana for the last 40 years of the Beis Hamikdash. So if Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was alive after the Beis Hamikdash, his last 40 years would have overlapped, at the very least, with the last 40 years of the Beis Hamikdash. And during the last 40 years of the Beis Hamikdash, there weren't judging capital cases, so therefore it's impossible, right? If Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was teaching the last 40 years, so that's when he would have been in the Sanhedrin, but there was no Sanhedrin that was active and judging capital cases during his last 40 years. So how could it be that he was interrogating witnesses in a capital case? Ela ben Zakkai de Alma. Rather, it's not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, it's somebody named Ben Zakkai. And this taka makes sense, because if it enters your mind that we're talking about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the student of Hillel, and the teacher of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, and correlate Rabbi Yochanan ben, correlate Rabbi ben Zakkai, would Rabbi refer to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as simply Ben Zakkai? Perfecting Gemara, Atanya Maisa Uvadak Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Buktzei Te'edim. We have a brisa where it says that it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who asked about the Uksei Te'edim. So it is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. El Tamar Yosef Nerabbi Ava. Rather, it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, but it wasn't in his last 40 years when he was teaching. It was prior to that when he was a student. But he wasn't at that time actually on the Sanhedrin. He was a student before his Rebbe. From Milsa, and he said and they agreed with what he said. He suggested something, and they agreed with his suggestion while he was a student. V'kavua b'shmei, and they established it in his name. Kavalomad ben Zakkai have a korele kitamar Yosef ne'rabo. And when he was learning, they refer Kavalomad when he was learning Ben Zakkai Avakorele Kitamar Yosef Ne'Rabbi. They called him Ben Zakkai, like a student who was sitting before his Rebbe. Kavalimed when he was teaching Havakorele Rabban Yochanan Ben Zakkai. They called him Rabban Yochanan Ben Zakkai. More kavod Kikorele Ben Zakkai Al Shem Demei Kara. And when I guess Rebbe refers to him as Ben Zakkai, it's based on when he was a student. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai al Shemashim is referred to as Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. It's based on now. It's based on once he was teaching. Once he was the great Tana Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Frag the Gemara. What does it mean? Right, we say that by bidikos, if one witness says I don't know, the testimony is fine, and even if both of them say I don't know, the testimony is fine. We want to say that that's obvious. Kilu, if when one person says the testimony, he says I don't know, the testimony is acceptable. Well then, kal v'chomer, when two people say I don't know, the testimony is acceptable, because pshita, it's obvious. Ki omar echad en yodei edusan kayemis. Well, if one of them says I don't know, and that's acceptable. Ki amri betrei nami edusan kayemis. Well, when the second one also says I don't know, well, he's saying the same thing. No better, no worse. So obviously, if one person says I don't know, it's okay. So when the other one says the same thing, it's no better, no worse. So of course, so why do we have to say if one of them says I don't know, it's kosher, and even if both of them say I don't know? I mean, why would I have thought otherwise? Omer of Sheshes says of Sheshes Areshika, it's actually not talking about the bedikos, it's talking about the chakiros. V'achikomer, this is what it's saying by chakiros. When it comes to the chakiros, afilu shnaim om, if you have three judges, if you have three witnesses, and two of them say, Yadainu, that we know the answer to this chakira. And one of them says, I don't know what day of the week it was, or whatever. Edusan betela, their edus is betela. It's invalid. Kimanu, is it like Rabbi Akiva? It's like Rabbi Akiva, the Makish Shlosh L'Shnaim, who compares 3 to 2, right? As we've seen before, and we'll see really in Masechta Makis, that when it comes to Edom Zobmin, Rabbi Akiva compares 3 to 2, so they have to be mazim, all of them. Anyways, that he compares them all together. So it's like, so basically, when you have 3 witnesses, if 2 of them answer for the chakira, but one of them says, I don't know, so then the entire testimony is thrown out, like Rabbi Akiva, who says, it's all for one and one for all. Omer Rava says, Rava va'idus and kayemes katani. but the Mishnah says that we're talking about edus and kayemis, where the edus is valid, not invalid. Rather says Rav Achikam, this is what it's saying. Afilu b'chakirus, when it comes to the chakirus, shnaim omrim yodainu, ve'echad omer yodea. If two say we know the answer to the chakira, one of them says I don't know. Edus and kayemis, the testimony is valid with the first two. Kiman delok Rabbi Akiva, which is unlike Rabbi Akiva, who says all for one and one for all. Okay, I guess that we would accept the testimony of the two. I imagine we would probably just drop the third. 1 second. I was one second. Right, so I think what it's saying is that, and therefore the testimony would stand with the other two. Okay. Rav Kahana, Rav Safra, Tanu Sanhedrin by Rabbah. Rav Kahana and Rav Safra were learning Sanhedrin by Rabbah, the great Amora Rabbah. Pagabehu, Rabbi Choma encountered them. Amalu, and he says to them, Mayam Risu ba b'Sanhedrin by Rabbah. Wow, you're learning Sanhedrin with Rabbah, the great Amora Rabbah. You must have some big chidushim on Masechta Sanhedrin. Amrilei, they said to him, Umayam Rinun ba b'Sanhedrin Gredoso. Look, even just what is there for us to say, even just by the regular Sanhedrin, not even Sanhedrin by the Amora Rabbah. But if you have any question, right? We don't have so much to say about Sanhedrin, but if you have a question, maybe we know the answer, maybe we can help you. Says to them, well, the Mishnah says, Ma bin chakiris lebedikis. What's the difference between chakiris and bedikis? Chakiris, by chakiris, if one of the witnesses says, I don't know, the testimony is bottle. But bedikis, but by bedikos, if one of them says, I don't know, or even if both of them say, I don't know, the edus is acceptable. But asks Rami Bar Chama, but michte idi v'idi d'oraisahi, both drishas and chakiris are the oraisa, mashna chakiris, mashna bedikis. Why should we have different standards for chakiris and bedikis? If I don't know is unacceptable by chakiris, the zel bezach should be by bedikis. Amalei, so amrulei, so they respond to him, I'll tell you why. Because the whole point of chakiris is about being able to establish a baseline for hazama. Those questions are crucial for establishing, for having Eidush Ata Yochel Azima. And therefore, it's imperative that the both witnesses answer all of the questions. Bedikas have nothing to do with Eidim Zobimim, and even if they say they don't know, it doesn't negatively impact their testimony. So Amrullah, they said to him, when it comes to chakiris, Amr Echad and Yodeh, if one of them says, I don't know, Edus and Betela, the testimony is invalid, because then it becomes Edus She'i Ata Yochel Azima, and that's a problem. But by Bedikos, Amr Echad and Yodeh, if one of them says, I don't know, Edus and Kayemes, their Edus is still nonetheless valid, because Edus Ata Yochel Azima, because you can still be Mezimit. Amalu, Rabbi Bar Chama responds to them, Iachi amrisuba, tuva amrisuba. Look, you said you didn't have so much to say about Sanhedrin, but I beg to differ. If this is what you have to say about Masechta Sanhedrin, you have quite a bit to say about Masechta Sanhedrin. Amrile, they said to him, Mitivuse demar aminan ba. You're just being nice. Tuva, yeah, you're just being nice, and that's why you're saying we have so much to say. But miniziyuse demar, if you wanted to be a little bit more aggressive and, question us a little bit further, dig a little deeper, you'll find that we actually really don't have very much to say. Friends, that was Daf Mem Aleph of Masechta Sanhedrin. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.